I've been asked through a lot of messages. I told you I didn't know I was going to preach on tonight. So I'm just talking. I did come across an interesting story. Not just a story of an individual, but I get asked all the time, especially with all the evil that's taking place in the world. I'm not even just talking about the Last Day series and the beast activities. I'm talking in general how people just are evil to one another. Now that's the way it's been from day one. It just happens to be a lot more people now, and the intensity, because Satan knows his end is near, has increased. And the question that came up was, how can these people ever be saved after they've done so great an evil? That recent individual here in United States News, Castro, having 3 girls, first of all, kidnapped 3 girls and had them chained up and enclosed in his house for 10 years. And I think the article said, or the news report said, they've only seen daylight twice in 10 years. People blowing up each other, people killing each other. For example, if Osama Bin Laden, and I'm going to probably hit a nerve tonight, and good, the nerve needs to be touched. You might ask, how could God save Osama Bin Laden if he was still alive, with all the evil that he did and was a part of? How about a person like Jeffrey Dahmer? Or any kind of serial killer? You think about it. How can God save these people? See, people, I'm going to the blackboard. People like to weigh sin by measure. Of course, lying, depending on the lie, it's not so bad. They could be saved. How about a thief? As long as that thief doesn't hurt anyone physically, they could be saved. Or even if they hurt someone physically but the person didn't die, they can be saved. They're a candidate. See, we're weighing sin by measure. Whose measure? Man's measure. Man's doing the measuring. He's weighing sin by degree of sin. Lying. Thief. Kidnapper. Kind of like a thief, but I just put kidnap. Castro. Now we're getting to more serious type of sins. Listen, it was my child, and I'll be quite frank with you. In the flesh, maybe to the day that the Lord takes me home, I'll have a problem with weighing sin by measurement, according to man's measurement, because if it was my child, what do you think I would want to do to Castro? And I'm sure there's others out there like me that would want to do the same thing. grab him by you-know-what, and castrate him at the very least. Now that's flesh talking. How about a murderer? Let's put murder here. As lying was not so bad now as we look at it, whether it's a white lie or not. Even stealing, a thief, doesn't look so bad. They could probably be still saved by grace. Jesus would probably still let them in if they convert and understand that they need his mercy, his blood covering. But now we get to murder, and depending what type of murder and degree of murder. What about if it was a mass murder? Man, it's hard sometimes to comprehend that God would save the mass murderer, especially Jeffrey Dahmer. Not only killed, but he ate people. How about that 71-year-old doctor was out of Philadelphia that murdered babies? Cut their spinal cord. 7 months old. Sorry. That's murder in my eyes. Let's go down to everybody's favorite. At least 3,000 people. Actually, it's over 3,000 people. No way, if he was still alive, be a candidate for God's grace. See, we weigh sin by measure. Man holds the measuring stick on sin, and then he categorizes it, whether in a religious institution, even a doctrinal point of view, by how bad the sin was, whether that person could be saved by grace or he's damned forever. Listen, if I had a family member that was in one of those towers, when the jet flew into it and my family member died, man, it's going to be hard to imagine that God could, if Osama Bin Laden still could reach, if Osama Bin Laden reached out to Jesus and say, Islam's wrong. Think about it. Well, we have a measurement, a weighing of sin by measure that man creates, but then we also have what God creates. What God measures man by. And it's only one measurement. Grace. No matter how bad the sinner, grace is the answer. Let me read you a story about a man It's about a page and a half story. I just want to read it to you. It's a true story. From the time I began going to school, it was easy for me to make friends. This caught the eyes of some who began to groom me with political ambitions in mind. Soon, what I had started as rather innocent affairs began to turn into social events, including the social drink and all that goes with it. It wasn't long before the social drink was not reserved for special occasions, but became a morning, noon, and night experience. It was a drunk, a 24-hour drunk. The virtues I had been noted for began to disappear, as steam does when it hits cold air. My ambitions, political friends left first. They couldn't have faith in a young lush, even if they had been the ones who started me drinking. It wasn't long before until even the children began to avoid me because I was anything but friendly when I would weave back from the saloon. I went from one job to another and from one place to live to another, and each time both the job and the apartment became less desirable. One day, now living in Chicago, he found himself and his family living in a rat-infested cellar apartment in the worst section in the city. Why my wife and little child stay with me, only God knows. For the pain and suffering I caused them cannot be described. One day our little child was taken seriously ill. A faithful doctor came, even though he knew there would be no payment for his call. After diagnosing the case, he reached into his own pocket, took out some money, and thrust it into my hand, shouting, "Run, don't walk, to the drugstore, which is 2 blocks from here. Here's the prescription. Come right back. It might even now be too late, so hurry." That's what the doctor said. That's what the doctor instructed. I climbed the stairs and was out onto the pavement. I looked to my left, and sure enough, I saw a drugstore about 2 blocks away. But then I looked to my right and saw that the saloon was only 1/2 block away. A sudden desire came over me, one that drove all thought of my sick child out of my head. Even the fact that the money in my hand did not belong to me was erased as I blindly rushed to the bar and shouted, quote, "Let's all drink, it's on me," end of quote. Soon the doctor money was gone, and then some other fool threw his money on the bar, and we continued on and through the day and into the night, while his child was dying. And the medication might just work. There was no guarantee of it. But that medication money now was gone. And he's gone day and night. When it was time to close, I was so far gone that the saloon keeper just threw me into the back room to sleep it off. When he came back the next day, I was still there, and it wasn't until the night began to approach that I came around enough to my senses to decide to go home. When I arrived back, I slowly descended the rickety stairs. I saw that someone was talking very quietly to my wife, and they were crying. I still did not know why, I was too still far gone to have understood. There had been no furniture before, but now there was a little box on a stand. A little box on a stand. I wondered what it could be. As I went over and looked into the box, I saw that it was the body of my little child, but looking very different. Someone had put on her clean clothes, new cloths, and somehow there was even a pair of brand new little shoes. Still, I didn't get the message. As I stood there, the urge came over me, and I craved another drink. What I wouldn't do for another drink. And it's despicable what he did. It was despicable that he didn't get the medication when the doctor gave him the money, only 2 blocks away, which might have saved his child. The child might not have died. That was despicable. But it continues. My dear friends, as I think back, in the next part of my heart feels as if it were ripped out, for I am so ashamed. As the urge overwhelmed me, I hurriedly slipped the new shoes from the cold feet of my precious child, rammed them into my pocket. As yet I had not attracted the attention of my wife and the woman with her. I stole out of the apartment. I went out of the apartment. I sold those little shoes for a few pennies and bought another drink. I had gone down so low that I had often said that I had to reach up to touch bottom. With all of this, I was not awakened to reality until one day, after some debauchery, I decided to end it all. With me gone, I reasoned the world would be a better off place, especially my wife. With this in mind, I headed for Lake Michigan to drown myself. It had gotten dark and cold, and as I wove down a street that would take me to the lake, I was suddenly given a push by someone who said, quote, "Why don't you go in there, bud? Why don't you go in there, bud?" End of quote. No, not end of quote. "It's nice and warm." Now end of quote. So why don't you go in there, bud? It's nice and warm. As I went through the open door, someone set me in a chair. It all happened so quickly that it took my muddled brain a little while to realize that I was in a room filled with men, and a man was speaking. He was talking as if he knew all about me, he said. Quote, "Perhaps you have come in here tonight and you haven't even planned it. In fact, you have decided that you're going to end it all. For you feel that no one understands you, no one cares, and there is no hope. My friend, I'm here to tell you there is someone who understands you. There is someone who cares for you, and I can tell you that there is hope for you. You will find all your answers when you come to Jesus Christ and receive Him as your personal Savior. He not only wants to save you from your mess, but wants to go with you the rest of your life, to keep you from getting into any more trouble. That's the message he heard. The speaker was Harry Monroe, and the place was the Pacific Garden Mission. This person said, I became a different person that night. God saved me and made me a new man. My wife got a new husband. The part with its sin and stain was washed away, and I found a brand new tomorrow. See, most, as I was saying earlier, churches, locations, would probably throw this guy out in the street, especially if they knew what he had just done and what his track record was. Being a drunk, irresponsible drunk. And maybe in a roundabout way, because no one ever knows. Partially the reason why his daughter died. There's not a church, there's not that many churches with their self-righteous attitudes that allow this individual in, even hear a message. Because they weigh sin by measurement. Oh, they want to know what your sin is so they can categorize it to see if you're good enough to make the membership, be allowed into fellowship. Well, this person went on to be a preacher of the same message that saved his soul and changed his life. And that message is Jesus Christ alone saves. This individual saw many hundreds come to put their trust in the only one who has the remedy for broken hearts and broken homes, broken by sin. He's the only one that knows and understands your deepest need. He died on the cross. Let himself be nailed on the star roost for all mankind's sins. All mankind's sins. Not just this individual, but all mankind. The question is, how could God save a man like this? How could he save a man, especially in the latter part of that list on the board, the left side of the board, or individuals that are mass murderers or kidnappers? The problem is, man tries to measure the grace of God by the weight of sin. I told you just a few moments ago, it's tough not to, especially if it's one of your family members. What if it was your son or daughter or your wife? It's tough if you put in that position. The most vile among these groups that are listening to the board and the ones that are not listening to the board are still candidates for God's redemption if they're still alive. Are you going to argue that they're not? Then you don't really believe in the gospel of peace, the gospel of grace, the gospel of salvation. He could save a Charles Manson. If a Charles Manson wants to recognize what Christ did for him and wants a new start with a new beginning to become a new man, disciple of Jesus Christ. You can't not measure according to man's measurement that which is without measure. That which is without measure. What is that? Right there. Grace. Grace. We were vile. Our vileness, it was just measured because of man's measuring system. But we still were vile. But God saved us through His precious Son. Well, my sin was not as bad as those sinners. Nevertheless, it was vile. Nevertheless, Jesus Christ had to get on a starus, and die. Whether it was for Castro or any other mass murderer still alive, or me, or you. We're all vile. Yes, there's degrees of evil. No doubt about that. Some more evil than others. But God's grace has no limitations when it comes penetrating that evil and erasing sin. We cannot measure that which is without measure, and that is grace. Grace is not some theological word or term that you see theologians use, preachers use, pastors use. It's much more than that. And I got to admit, much more than I'm capable to even understand. But I know it exists. There's not some known or acceptable definition for this word grace that somehow gets measured by a man-made system of weighing or measuring sin. God's definition, thank God, is far greater, far more reaching, far more effective, and the only thing that can save a vile person, no matter what degree of evil that vile person finds himself in. So quit asking me, can someone like that be saved? You just don't see it because you're still stuck in a measurement system of sin that man has created. God's not man. Romans 5, verse 20. Moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound. The law was just to show us how vile a person or of a people we are. But where sin abounded, no matter what category you want to put that sin in, and there's many more than this, what I labeled on this board. These are just a few examples from a lesser to a greater degree. But where sin abounded in any category, grace, keep it on the board, grace did much more abound. Grace did much more abound. I just lost my mic. Grace wipes all of this out. The blood of Jesus wipes all of this out. To be saved by grace takes you out of these core categories, takes you away from the man's measuring stick or system of weighing sin, and now you're under God's abounding grace. You'd be surprised, now you come back to me. You'd be surprised how many so-called Christians just don't get this concept. I'm not trying to reduce the penalty that someone that creates some of the evil that you're hearing in the news lately, what they should be punished, not to take place because they're abounding in grace now. No. You've done the crime, you're going to have to do the time, as they say. You're going to have to pay the penalty. There is consequences to sin. But it doesn't change one iota of how you could be rescued from it. And that is, well, there's only one answer. Jesus, the Christ. He can rescue from it. He can rescue any vile person from it. And we all vile until we have that blood covering. The Father will not even look upon us without His own precious Son, blood covering. That we've been rescued by. That's why you go to the table of the Lord, to remember what He did. He spilled His blood. He broke His body for us. It's up to Him who He's going to choose to be in that us category, not some system of measurement that weighs sin by man, but according to Him. I know it's tough. Like I said earlier, if it was one of my children, I told you, first thing that I would want to do is castrate Castro. That's the flesh. But I know darn well also any vile person, no matter what degree of vileness you might categorize it under, has that same promise if they come to recognize it for what it is. But where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. Grace did much more abound. Thank you, Jesus, for your saving grace. You get it? If you do, play the song.